We are now going to turn to our in-house war analyst, Jon Elmer, contributing editor at the Electronic Intifada. Jon, what have you specifically been watching closely over the last few days, especially after the weekend? We saw a bunch of new videos come out from the Qassam brigades. How can you assess the war at this point?
Yeah, well, so now we're a week into the ground war. We're starting to see some of the movements take shape and understand a little bit what Israel's plan and where they're moving. We've seen fierce fighting, fierce resistance. The resistance movements, the Qassam brigades and Sarai al-Quds are putting out constant communiques with their actions. Abu Ubaidah said the other day that they couldn't even keep track of all of their actions. But just to give people a sense, on any given day, there's between 30 and 50 described actions that range from, the constant rocket fire that's been happening on Israeli cities and towns, as well as the mortars on mustering troops on the borders. We've seen Qassam use their Air Force suicide drones aimed at mustering Israeli troops. We've seen them drop drone-dropped munitions into a crowd of Israeli troops mustering. The Israelis are looking to move into the territory, and they're doing it in large numbers. And so they have been seen in clusters in a way that I think maybe we'll talk about with Ali later, but just shows kind of the lack of on the ground actual war fighting experience that the Israelis have. The resistance has really been remarkable. The way that they have given us the opportunity to see what's going on through their, learned from Hezbollah, learned that the media arm of the Qassam brigades is a super important part of telling people what's going on and showing these actions and giving the narrative of what's actually happening on the ground. Because the Israelis are very, unclear about exactly what is going on, and they've been moving very slowly. And it hasn't been, they're talking about how they're encircling Gaza City. We haven't seen that yet. What we've seen is significant fighting on three primary axes, but the two main axes are in the northwest. The Israelis have come across the north of the Gaza Strip and are looking to move down the beach rather than what we had talked about before of moving through Shajaiya in the east and moving through these areas. It seems like their war plan has switched. Probably it was unlikely their plan. I think both groups' battle plans change as they see what unfolds on the ground. But now we're seeing the Israelis move down the western coast, moving along the beach, which is for them easier to do with their bulldozers than, bombing all of Gaza City and driving through the center of it. But yeah, I think the strong resistance has kept the Israelis from moving to the next stage of their ground operation, which they've promised is to root out Hamas. If that's the case, they're going to have to move into fixed positions, which we haven't seen yet. They seem to still be on the move. But what we've seen is pretty significant buildup at two of the strong points that the Israelis have set up. They have 90, according to satellite images. So we're looking at two things here. We're looking at satellite imagery of Israeli troop movements. We're matching that with Israeli videos and statements of where they are. And then we're matching that with videos and statements from the resistance of where the axes of fighting are. So the predominant fighting has been in the northwest of the Gaza Strip. And that's when they're moving down the beach, but also in the east, in the southeast corner of Gaza City. They've been moving to cut across the Gaza Strip, to cut it in half, that we talked about on previous shows. And the resistance shows multiple times a day videos of their homemade weaponry built in Gaza, attacking successfully Israeli positions inside houses when they take up positions inside houses, or inside their armor, which is where they have been for the vast majority of the time. We haven't seen, the only time we've seen Israelis on foot has been in the wide open fields of the north in the buffer zone that we talked about before. There's no footage yet. We haven't seen any footage of Israelis boots on the ground in urban areas. And the only time we did see that fighting in urban areas was Jabalia last week that we talked about, and Israel dropped 8 2,000-pound bombs onto 20 houses in order to kill, they say, one fighter who led an anti-tank unit that killed 2 Givati Brigade soldiers. So essentially they get hit and then respond by essentially just wasting the entire area, which is something we saw previously, in 2002 in Jenin. We've seen it, of course, in Lebanon throughout the years, in Kana and Bin Jubail. When they get hit, they respond with massacres, and that's what we're seeing. And I think that's the analysis right now is a scary part of what's going on, is that they don't have apparently the courage to go in on the ground. And so they're doing this work through the air and through artillery. And when you're in Jabalia or you're in Beit Hanun or Beit Lahia, these are smaller farming. I mean, Jabalia is a refugee camp. The other two are farming villages. It's not the same as going through street after street of 15-story buildings in an urban environment like Gaza City. So what we've seen so far is just the very beginnings, and they're doing things very carefully, and are still, they lost 30 soldiers this week. That's what they've announced. We know that they flew 260 medevacs out of the Gaza Strip. But one of the things about their armored vehicles is that especially their new ones, their ATAN infantry fighting vehicles, they're like miniature ICUs. They call them mobile ICUs. They have fridges for blood transfusions. They have all the medical care that they need. They have a washroom inside it. So they literally don't ever have to get out, except for their medevacs, get out of their vehicles. And that's what they're doing right now. All of their bluster about how they're going to take all of Gaza City, or all of Gaza, and kill every single Hamas fighter for generations to come, as Netanyahu said, just the most maximalist objective. If that's the objective, then they haven't even begun that. And already you can see the brutality of the way they're fighting this war. They're targeting Shifa Hospital. They're targeting ambulances and telling us that Hamas fighters are putting weapons in ambulances after, for a month, they've been telling us about this massive tunnel network that allows their fighters to move everywhere without being touched. And now all of a sudden they don't have that tunnel network. They're smuggling in ambulances. This is just to open the ground for the urban warfare, where they believe that Shifa Hospital is a legitimate target, that the Indonesian hospital is a legitimate target. As previous guests have said, 16 out of 35 hospitals in the Gaza Strip are completely out of service because of similar type besiegement. They bombed the solar panels that people had linked up to Shifa Hospital. When people moved south, if they had solar panels on their roof, they were stringing those to the connection for Shifa, running things like incubators with a backup supply. Israel went and picked out all of the solar panels off the roofs of the building that were feeding Shifa Hospital. They told people to leave Gaza, and we saw the other day they massacred people walking on foot because people are too scared to leave in their cars, because, as we saw the other day with the tank shell just blowing the car away, any car moving is a target. So people left Gaza City on their feet, on foot, and Israel massacred them. And so the message is that you can't leave Gaza City. People are too scared to leave Gaza City because of these massacres. And all they're doing is targeting, again, civilian infrastructure, destroying the water reservoir in Jabalia, just really putting a fine point on all the things that Ahmed said at the beginning when people are talking about what it's like to live in Gaza under this siege. People don't have water. They're starting to get sicknesses from waterborne, like deprivation, starvation. But the ground war that they promised and all the bluster to sort of re-establish the image of the Israeli army after it was humiliated in front of the entire world on October 7th, really, they haven't done any of that fighting. The only fighting they've done is this continual massacring of civilians, as if bombing civilians is going to lessen support for the resistance, when
Jon,
everybody knows it does the opposite of that.
Jon, that's a great overview. I think we have a couple of clips we want to show, and I'm going to ask you about them. Should we do that now?
Sure.
All right. Which one do you want to do first?
Well, the Israelis, the Haaretz article that was in the paper yesterday was basically verbatim the IDF explaining what their mission was. And they say right off the top that the mission in Gaza to do what the government is asking them to do. See, look at the whole article. The IDF said, so the IDF says that they can do what the government is asking them to do, namely eradicate every single Hamas member. But they say in there very clearly that it'll take many, many months, if not many years. And then they say also that they're not going to go into the tunnels. They're saying that at this point, it's too dangerous to go in the tunnels. So we're going to stay outside and, quote, you can see that they'll be dealt with, quote, at a later stage. So this whole bluster about going in the tunnels and fighting face to face in the tunnels, they actually have army-wide writ saying that going in the tunnel is prohibited, which is also, we talked about what they did in 2014, their vaunted tunnel war of 2014. Soldiers were prohibited from entering the tunnels unless they'd been destroyed at one end. Which, as we know from a spider web, is impossible to do. So it basically gives the Israelis the out to not touch tunnels, which is where all the fighters are. Tens of thousands of them, according to the fighters, according to the Israelis, according to their intelligence assessments. That's where all the fighters are. And so they're telling us on day 5, day 6 of the ground war that actually we're not going to go into the tunnels, which are the #1 tool for the resistance to fight the ground war, is their tunnels, is their ability to move around, to come up in places the Israelis didn't expect. We've seen in Qassam videos already many of the things that we talked about earlier on these shows. We've seen Qassam use RPGs and anti-tank weapons from high up in buildings, shooting down on top of them, which we talked about would happen. We've seen videos of them mouse holing in between buildings, making holes in between buildings so they can move between buildings without going outside. We've seen that. This is just in their videos that they show. So it's only a small portion of what they're actually doing. But we've seen all that. We've seen the Israelis not be able to occupy buildings and hold that territory. For them to invade Gaza City, they're going to have to move into the buildings and fight in the buildings, because the buildings have the tunnels in them. And so if they're not going to fight inside tunnels, then they at least have to be inside the buildings. But they're saying they're not going to do that. And so really, I think we're seeing the sort of tempering of the actual fighting component of the Israelis. But what worries me and worries people in Gaza is it looks like there are no red lines. And so if they're not going to fight face to face, like they've said they're going to do to restore the image of their Southern command, then they're just going to continue to bomb. And we know that people didn't leave Gaza City. There's hundreds of thousands of people still in Gaza City, friends of mine, friends of ours that are still in Gaza City, and who are people don't want to leave. Their family members don't want to leave because they saw the footage filmed by a kid on a bicycle the other day, riding his bike through the carnage of people, you know, Palestinian refugees becoming refugees again and walking from their community in Gaza City and being massacred by a plane. That's what Israel's doing. And if that's the way they're going to fight this war, tens of thousands of people are going to die. 10,000 have already died.
It strikes me, John, if we look at this. So from what I've seen, and we've looked at all the Qassam videos that come out, when I think we may show a clip, but we're unfortunately, due to the censorship on this channel, we can't show them because this program will then be deleted by YouTube, as happened to the program before last. So we have to be careful about that. But we've watched the videos and we've talked about them offline. And what they show is, in many cases, Israeli armor, that's to say tanks and armored personnel carriers, state of the art, I assume, being destroyed, sometimes at very close range, by Qassam fighters using these Yasin anti-tank missiles or Cornet anti-tank missiles, or even by placing explosives by hand on top of the tanks. And we even saw that with an armored bulldozer. People have seen the videos. What we don't see in any of those videos is Israeli infantry, which, as I understand, in urban warfare, you have to have infantry on the ground, clearing streets, clearing buildings, guarding the armor. The armor is actually there to support infantry, in the sense that the infantry directs the tanks, fire over there, fire over here. In other words, the armor in an urban setting is not the main course. It's like the side dish. The infantry is the main course. I'm sorry to use this analogy. And also, again, as I understand from my reading, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, these tanks do have sophisticated detection systems, radars, and all sorts of sensors and things. But in an urban setting, that's just going to produce a lot of noise. These tanks are meant to be out in open fields fighting against other tanks or what have you. So in other words, if you imagine you're driving your car, but you black out all the windows of your car except for, let's say, a little square in the windscreen this big, that's what it's like to be in a tank in the middle of Gaza City.
Yeah, and Palestinians know that because they've watched children in the West Bank for the last, for the whole Intifada. The children in the West Bank showed us that, because the tanks can't see. They don't have vision around them. So once you get close to a tank, the tank actually can't see you. And so kids, like 10-year-old kids, will climb up on a tank and try and pull, or an APC, and try to pull the gun off. Because the troops lack situational awareness and 360-degree awareness to such a degree that children can climb on the tank.
Right.
And as you said, now the resistance is able to take that message, and instead of climbing on the tank, they're putting explosive devices by hand in the exact spot on the tank where they're the weakest. So they're able to deliver that by hand.
So what I want to say, so what we see now is that, so up till now, this could change, but up to this point, the Israelis who get beyond the perimeter, the empty fields of Gaza, are not willing to get out of their tanks or their armored personnel carriers. They're not willing to go into buildings, or when they have gone, we've seen at least one builder in one video, they've been blasted by one of these thermobaric grenades that the resistance has.
And then they bombed Jabalia. That's when they were in a
Right.
building.
Right. They're not willing to get out of the armor. They're not willing to go down in the tunnels. So in other words, they're not willing to do any of what it takes so far to do the things they said they would do. Now we have this one video that was put out by Netanyahu's office the other day. Can we take a look at that, Tamara?
We won't get banned for this one because Netanyahu put it
Yeah,
out.
exactly. This was put out by Ophir Gendelman, who is, well, just okay, just pause it for a second, Tamara, or just let it advance so we see the whole of the Arabic sentence there. And this was yeah, all right, just pause it for a second. So it says, the dogs chase the dogs of Hamas until victory. And this video supposedly, again, it was posted by Ophir Gendelman, the official Arabic language spokesperson for Benjamin Netanyahu. And he claimed that this shows an Israeli soldier chasing a Hamas fighter through a tunnel. Run the video. Let's take a look. All right, I don't even know if that soundtrack is genuine, but it turns out
you got me.
Yeah, it turns out within an hour or so, an Israeli journalist called Yoav Zitun, who is the military correspondent for Ynet, which is one of the major Israeli news sites.
Yeah, it's not a like left-leaning newspaper
No, this
at all.
is like
No.
it's related to Yediot Aharonot, which is one of the top newspapers in Israel. It's their website. Came out and said this is a training video from Operation Protective Edge, so from 2014 or earlier. This is a training video, and interestingly, so it was put out by Netanyahu's office, but not by the Israeli army. It was not on any of the Israeli army official accounts. It's totally fake. But what it shows you is that they know that in order to do what they say they're going to do, they would have to go down in the tunnels. And yet the army is saying, we're not going to go down in the tunnels. So it just seems that, I guess fake it till you make it in a way. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it repeatedly. The Israeli record of fighting face-to-face in urban confrontations is very thin. It's possible that they do that. That's what they're promising to do. But the record of it is very thin. That's why they have to show a fake video. And that they show a video like that, and the dog handler actually is wearing the guard. So anyone that's worked with dogs immediately sees that that's fake. And it's the same with the tanks, right? When you talked about the infantry being outside of tanks, like I'm not sure what the exact number is, but something like 1.3 million Americans served in Iraq. They served outside of a tank. They know what it's like to cover the back of a tank. And so there's thousands of people that are watching these videos of the Israelis saying like, these are very obvious mistakes. Packing troops together, like they dropped that dropped munition right in the center of what looked like about 30 troops just standing around. They're not covering their back. I think it's probably best to not show the video if it means that we're going to get taken off the air for it. But essentially, Qassam Brigades released a video that had 10 separate incidents of RPGs and anti-tank weapons being fired from point blank range or put an explosive physically by hand onto 10 armored vehicles that exploded. And so their armor is the strongest armor in the world. They admit that because their tanks fight in their own neighborhoods. They don't have to worry about considerations that the Americans worry about their tanks, because American tanks have to go onto planes to be flown over to their imperialist wars. Israel just drives down the road to get to theirs. So their tanks can be twice the weight of American armor. But eventually, these tanks are going to have to hold neighborhoods in order to find tunnels, or even just to fight Hamas, let alone defeat every single last one of them. They'll have to hold neighborhoods. And in order to hold a neighborhood, you have to be out, dismounted, out of your armor, looking behind you, looking above you, and taking risks. And the idea is that you take calculated risks by looking around you, which ultimately makes everybody in the armored corps safer. But the Israelis aren't right now willing to do that. They're very casualty averse. And they've basically eliminated the two parts that are the most important for the ground war, which is to get out on foot and to go down into the tunnels. And if you're not going to do either one of those, then all you're doing is massacring civilians, starving them, creating waterborne diseases on a civilian population, when you don't have the actual courage to fight the battle that you're saying you're going to fight. And if you're not going to fight that battle, then stop the war, stop attacking civilians, and figure out some other way to get your prisoners out than promising a war that's going to last for more than a year, when 1 month into it, you've killed 10,000 people. Is that the pace of how we're going to go? Is there really no red line that even if they're not fighting this war, the Americans won't stop them from doing this? Because that's the pace. If you're talking 10,000 people killed every month for the next year,
and that may well accelerate, because now we the first month people still had relative amount of resources, whether it was food or just simply their own health. But after a month of this, people are worn down, their health is worn down. They're living in the horrifying conditions that Ahmed Samak described of, toilets that can't be flushed.
And crowded, right?
UN
Very
schools
crowded.
where you have 6 toilets serving thousands of people with no water. Horrifying conditions. I mean, death camp conditions, and I say that without any exaggeration or hyperbole. But if they are not going to fight, go down into the tunnels and do the things they said that they would do, and even if they want to, they may not be capable of it.
No, it doesn't seem like it.
We have to hope, and we have to make sure, let me put it that way, that they are not able to just indefinitely massacre people from the air, because that has got to be something that the world just cannot tolerate any longer. Even if Joe Biden and Secretary Blinken want to tolerate it for longer, I can't imagine that the world can let this go on indefinitely. And we can't allow it.